In accordance with the customs of this university, I open the ceremony with the following words. Spiritus Sancti, gratia illuminet, sensus et corda nostra. Please take your seat. Dear Mr. Çallı, dear paronyms, dear family and friends, welcome to this ceremony of the defense of the Ph.D. of Mr. Çallı. Very much welcome also to the people attending from Turkey or elsewhere by live stream. My name is Van den Muizenberg. I'm just a GP and a professor here at the university, and I have the honor to replace our rector in chairing this ceremony. And for the ones among you who are not familiar with our traditions at the university, I will explain a little bit what you are going to attend the next hour, and to introduce the people you will see here besides me. Well, to start, here next to me we have the supervisor, the promoter of Mr. Çallı, that's Professor Van Ginneken. And besides him, Dr. Murphy, she was also the co-supervisor. They have already asked all their questions the last few years during the preparation of the thesis, and they will keep silent until the defense has closed. And then you see 5 other people. I will introduce their names when it's their turn to ask a critical question, and of which we expect the answer of Mr. Çallı, and also one opponent will be present by Zoom, and I will introduce her also when she has a turn. But now I would give the floor to the candidate for the degree of doctor.
With the permission of the doctorate board, and in order to obtain the degree of doctor from Radboud University Nijmegen, I would like to defend in public my dissertation entitled Deep Learning Methods Towards Clinically Applicable Chest X-ray Interpretation Systems. X-ray imaging was discovered in 1895 and quickly became a critical part of healthcare. Developed countries take many millions of X-rays every year. The chest X-ray focuses on the chest. A chest X-ray requires an X-ray source. A patient comes in front of the source, and in front of the patient, there is a recording plate. As the patient stands between the X-ray source and the recording plate, when we turn on the X-ray source, X-ray beams go through the patient and hit the recording plate. While going through the body, X-rays get absorbed by the bones and tissue and lose their intensities. In the end, X-rays with different intensities get recorded by the plate. This creates an image of the internals of the patient. As a result, we get the chest X-ray revealing the internals of the chest area. In this picture, you see the chest X-ray of my beloved father, Şükrü Çallı, taken in January 2023. Chest X-ray is a convenient and common imaging type. It is cost-efficient, easy to use, and safe. The demand for chest X-ray reading has been increasing, yet the number of radiologists does not grow as fast. This situation is causing a problem in the radiology workflow worldwide. We need more and more radiologists to read all the chest X-rays. As a result, hundreds of thousands of unread chest X-rays pile up. An automated system that reads chest X-rays could help this process. It would reduce the pressure on radiologists and help them manage the growing demand. Recent developments in a machine learning technique called deep learning show promise for such an automated system. But can we just use deep learning in healthcare? In my research, we identified and addressed some requirements for using deep learning for automated chest X-ray reading. We first explored chest X-ray analysis in the deep learning field. We reviewed many peer-reviewed studies and observed how deep learning is used to read chest X-rays. In this publication that you can find on Chapter 2, we have seen that public data sets are a common data source, and public data sets introduce some problems with the reliability of deep learning models. One big problem with public data sets is the label noise. Many popular data sets mark each chest X-ray indicating if it shows a disease. This indication is called a label. They usually use radiologist reports to collect labels, but sometimes this process goes wrong, and a chest X-ray gets mislabeled. We call this the label noise. Can we produce reliable deep learning models using data sets with label noise? In Chapter 3, to see the effects of label noise, we train deep learning systems by gradually introducing more and more noise. This has shown that deep learning models can be robust to label noise, making deep learning partially satisfy the reliability requirement for clinical use. A form of label noise leads to the equivalent terminologies requirement. Imagine we have two conditions called the apple and the pineapple. If someone wants to collect labels for the apple, they would look for the radiology reports that mention the word apple. However, this process may go wrong, and because these words are similar, the reports that say pineapple may also be labeled as having apple. A deep learning model trained with this data will confuse the terminologies for apple and pineapple diseases, creating unwanted scenarios in healthcare. This problem reveals the requirement for equivalent terminologies. To resolve this, we propose to look at the disagreements between the model and the radiologist, specifically when the model has confidence and certainty of its prediction. We show that such conflicts can point to inequivalent terminology problems. We published our work that provided some answers for the effects of label noise in terms of robustness and equivalent terminologies requirements. You can find it in Chapter 3. Next, an automated system in clinical use may need to explain why it provides some answers. This introduces the explainability requirement for deep learning models. To satisfy this requirement, many studies show which pixels are the most important for a prediction. Yet, we have seen that this method is only sometimes suitable for medical use. Instead, in Chapter 4, we propose a system that defines some concrete signs of a disease and detects them. So when detecting pineapples, instead of saying that this is a pineapple, we propose to define the unique features of a pineapple. For example, its unique shape, size, rough skin, and color transition. Then, given a fruit, we can say that this fruit has the unique shape, size, and rough skin of a pineapple. So I think this is a pineapple. We have used a condition called emphysema to apply this in chest x-rays. We have used a well-studied protocol that defines 4 signs of emphysema. According to this protocol, a patient with 2 or more signs is positive. We have shown that a model that describes these signs works as well as a model that only predicts emphysema. Then, when a disease is detected through such well-defined signs, it leads to explainable results. We have published this method and our results. You can find it in chapter 4. When working on these publications, we have seen many irrelevant cases which are obviously not fitting in the context of our deep learning models. This led us to define another requirement for a chest X-ray reading system. A chest X-ray reading system should be able to reject irrelevant cases. For example, a system designed for adults should reject the chest X-rays of children or X-rays of different body parts. To overcome this problem, in chapter 6, we proposed Frodo. Let's say we have a deep learning model that's trained to look at apples to detect bad ones. To do that, the model creates an internal representation that is only suitable for apples. Frodo works with such numeric internal representations. To find what kind of things this model can work with, we take some apples that we know the model can work with. We put these apples in the model and collect all the numbers it used to represent them. Now, these numbers represent what the model expects. When we are using this model in the clinic, an unexpected input may come in. Unknowingly, we may put this unexpected input in the model. In this process, we can take the numbers the model has used to represent this new input and compare it with the internal representations we collected earlier. By doing so, we can see if this new input is within the expectations of our model. If not, we can reject making predictions for this input. We have shown that this method works with various kinds of deep learning models. We considered various unexpected images to see the performance of Frodo in detecting them. We compared to the established methods. Frodo requires no extra model and no additional data. Hence, it comes for free. Our results show that Frodo can easily help deep learning models reject irrelevant cases. We published our results and made our method available as an open source library. You can see it in chapter 6. Lastly, in the healthcare system, there's a lot of data about a patient's health. To make a decision, medical experts combine the information about the patient from different sources. So there should be systems that can connect chest X-ray results to the rest of the healthcare. When designing such a system, one big problem is missing data. Because collecting data from a patient is a complicated process, and as you can imagine, all patient data is not always relevant. Even so, some data may get lost in the collection process. To overcome the missing data problem, in chapter 5, we proposed a denoising model. This model takes the result of a chest X-ray reading as an input, combines it with some health data. In this example, some laboratory results are used. A denoising model purposefully hides some of the data. This imitates different cases when different types of data can be missing. One part of the model learns to predict the hidden inputs, and another part of the model tries to perform the task at hand, predicting a disease, for example. Overall, this model learns to work with missing data. We designed this system to detect COVID-19 infection based on chest X-rays and blood markers. For this work, we collaborated with 2 hospitals in the Netherlands, and we sent our resulting models to Africa to detect COVID-19 infection in rural areas. Using many experiments, we have shown that our method works great when up to 80% of the inputs are missing. Our results are published in this article and in chapter 5 of the thesis. In my work, we have compiled a list of requirements for deep learning-based chest X-ray reading systems to be used in healthcare. We have also provided methods to help create deep learning models that fit them. But this list of requirements cover only a tiny area. More work is necessary to extend these requirements. To do so, I suggest a close collaboration between deep learning researchers and healthcare professionals. Having presented the summary of my dissertation, I return the floor to the rector.
Thank you very much for this very clear explanation, and it explains to us that you really did some fruitful research. Thank you. Now we will start the defense, and that will be started by the members of the manuscript committee. That's a committee of 3 experts in the field who, before we could start this defense, has carefully read the manuscript and deemed it of good enough quality to be defended here today. So the defense will start now with Professor De Vries. He is a professor in information retrieval here at Radboud University Medical Center.
Dear candidate, before I start the opposition, I want to congratulate you with a great book. Sometimes it is rumored that books can end up as holding monitors, but I'm sure that in your dissertation's case, this will not be the situation. Especially, it starts with a great literature survey that is timely, and I learned a lot from it. And unfortunately, it's very good, so there's not much to oppose in that part of the thesis. So I have to go to other areas where I maybe also have a more appropriate background to ask valid questions. And I want to start with the very nice work in chapter 6 about Frodo. So you write, and this is also a beautiful sentence actually, Frodo is free because it is plug and play and can work with any trained deep learning model. But is it really plug and play? So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the distributional assumptions that are inherent to the method, the way it's been developed. So I understood that the distribution of the activations of the nodes in intermediate layers need to be of a normal distribution. Is that understanding correct?
Dear opponent, yes, we use Mahalanobis distance, and Mahalanobis distance has the underlying assumption that the distribution is normally, the data is normally distributed.
Yes. So if you first put the data in a model that is normal, then that doesn't really guarantee that it is normally distributed, does it?
Indeed. Indeed, that's correct.
Yeah, so did you investigate whether this distributional assumption is indeed a valid one to make?
I think if we look at, I'm not sure if this is 100% answering your question, but if we look at the distances, for example, in page 148, figure 6.7, we see not the, we see that the distances can be somewhat represented with a normal distribution, and maybe from there we might be able to make a jump and say that, yeah, the data might also be normally distributed, but you are right in your question that this is an assumption and this has to be evaluated further. But also other deep learning studies such as Bayes normalization, there is an underlying assumption that these features are, these intermediate representations are normally distributed, and we just took that assumption without further validating it.
Yeah, I understand. I was myself wondering, so given that the Mahalanobis distance is an important ingredient in the method, whether it would be an option to consider a mixture of Gaussians where you now use single Gaussians, because I think it would allow the extension to still keeping the same method and then being robust to different underlying distributions. Would that be an idea to consider?
I think that's a brilliant idea.
Okay, well then, I'm happy that you agree with me. So let's then move to chapter 4. And I suspect that this topic is not completely finished yet, about chapter 6. But chapter 4, so I'll ask with an easy opening question, and that is, so the whole thesis is presented as a deep learning thesis.
Yeah.
But what I like so much about the work is that it is actually not just using deep learning to as a sort of a black box tool. You use it in a very sensible way, where you leave room for knowledge of the experts and knowledge about patients. But is it then still an excellent example of deep learning? That question arises a little bit. So should you not present it as a logic under uncertainty over image patterns, just as an alternative way to present the method?
Indeed, this is a different way to formulate the problem. We are, instead of formulating the problem as a standard classification approach, we are presenting it as a sign detection approach. And you are right, maybe this is not limited to deep learning, but a broader topic that we can
I think some deep learning proponents, but that does not include myself in this case, would sort of say that you throw away the child with the bathwater, because you start with 4 signals you know already, and then you enforce them in the model, leaving it no room to tell you that there are 4 other signals that are much more interesting to work with. Right?
Yeah.
So what would be your defense to such a criticism?
I think that's an interesting question, because it leads to what are we trying to answer here? Do we treat the medical experts as the people who know what we should communicate with, or do we treat them as some people who just take answers from our models and then implement them in real life? And I think it's more like the former. We should treat the medical experts as medical experts who know what they are doing and who we should communicate our results properly to. But I agree with what you're saying. The model may have performed much better if we provided it with only black box emphysema true false cases. So that stands indeed.
And then, of course, starting with this known signals in the whole methodology is what makes you explain the model. So, and that's why you call it explainable, I suppose.
Indeed.
So did you consider also validating the explainability of your model?
I think that indeed requires more work from us to validate the validity of these explanations. But given that these are well studied, coming from 50 years back, and if necessary, a medical expert can go back and check the basis research for this to understand it better, I feel like this is a valid explanation, but indeed the utility of these explanations should be researched further.
Yeah, maybe one final thing to ask, if I still may.
A short question with a short answer, please.
Let me then leave it as more a comment. And that's then maybe for your goal to need less radiologists, it might not be the best way to ground the work in medical knowledge that requires a lot of training. But of course, I think we agree that some follow-up work would be very interesting in this direction. Thanks for the exchange of ideas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And there always be room for much more discussion, I am sure. Thank you very much. Then I would like to give the floor to Professor De Bruyne. She is joining us by Zoom, and she is a professor in artificial intelligence in medical image analysis at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam. The floor is yours, Professor De Bruyne.
Thank you. Dear candidate, of course, I also first want to congratulate you with your the very nice thesis you produced, and also I'd like to congratulate your promoter and co-promoter with this work. And I apologize, I can't join you in Nijmegen in person today, but I'm very happy for the opportunity to still ask you some questions this way. As all good research does, your thesis did answer a lot of questions, but it also raised some new questions. And I'd like to start the discussion actually where Professor De Vries left off, discussing the assumptions about the Frodo out-of-distribution detection. So we already discussed quite a bit the assumptions for the Mahalanobis distance, and are your inputs for the Mahalanobis distance, are they really Gaussian distributed? I think you said that you didn't really test that, but it's likely because it's also assumed to be the case in some other components in the networks. But if you think about the classification, and the deeper layers of your network, you're optimizing your network to perform a classification. So to have, at least if you're classifying apples and pineapples, you would have a bimodal distribution. So what is your Mahalanobis distance going to do there? And have you seen that it doesn't work that well in some layers?
Dear opponents, as you said, the model does not perform as well in every layer. Actually, it performs much better in the middle, let's say, layers. So the earlier layers of the model and the later layers of the model, and we can also see this in the same figure, actually, in page 148, figure 6.7, we see that the layer 7 and 8, for example, performs much better than layers 11, 12, 13. Here, being better it means being lower for the out-of-distribution classes. Sorry, being able to distinguish better the out-of-distribution classes.
Yeah.
And if you look at layers 7, 8, those perform much better than first layers 1, 2, 3, for example, or the later layers that come that are 11 and ahead.
I agree with you, and that also leads me to my next question. So for the combination of different layers, you chose perhaps for simplicity to take the average. And what are the assumptions there? And wouldn't you expect that indeed if one layer is very different, your sample should already be out of distribution? Indeed. So take the max.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So the assumption here is that different layers will detect different differences. So the assumption is that the layers that are further ahead will make decisions about the classification result, if the classification result comes from within our distribution. And the earlier layers, they may be more important for determining the image type. So if this is actually a chest X-ray or not. And by combining all of these, we remove the requirements for making this choice, because this is a very difficult choice. And to be able to make proper decisions on this choice, we need some data. And that's not always the case. We don't always have...
Well, you're talking about layer selection, I think, here.
Indeed.
But you could also just choose the maximum distance for any layer.
Indeed, we could. However, as you can see in figure 6.7, different layers produce results in different ranges. And choosing the maximum kind of enforces the model to use the layer with the maximum distribution. And indeed, this shows an opening in my work. I should have considered better these different distributions in these different layers and adapted my work maybe a little bit instead of just taking the average.
All right, but it works well anyway.
Yeah,
So.
it works well in the end anyways.
Then I'd like to ask also about chapter 3, the detection of label noise. So you propose 2 metrics to detect label noise, but on the other hand, you also show that models are quite resilient to label noise in the training data. So how do you envision this detection to be used in practice?
So when I talk about label noise, I talk about 2 types of label noise. One is random. That means that we have some samples that are false positives and some samples that are false negatives. So there is some variation in the correctness of the labels. And this is not structured, this is random. So what I claim is the deep learning models are robust to this random shape of label noise. However, in cases that there is a structured noise where a certain type of image is consistently labeled, or not even consistently, but in a lot of cases they are labeled as positive. In this case, it's the pineapple, right? If you have a lot of pineapples labeled as apples, then the model will learn to label pineapples as apples. And here what we are trying to say is, if a radiologist beforehand looks at some of these pictures and says that, hey, these are not apples, and if you look at this error that the model makes, then the radiologist will be able to, or the model developers, will be able to find the structured label noise, which causes the requirements of equivalent terminologies.
You might also be introducing a bias there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because your model is not able to detect any kind of label errors.
Excuse me, I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly.
So I think you're proposing to detect wrong labels in your training data, probably via cross-validation, to train more reliable models that don't have this structured noise.
Could you give
But
us
your
short...
model is also a deep learning model, which is probably not able to detect all errors. So you are introducing a bias there, and what does this mean in your downstream analysis?
And could you give a short answer to that, please? It sounds difficult.
This process is done after we train the model, and it is to find the noise in the data set. So it's not to train a model with different labels. But in the end, it might lead to some bias in a downstream task that relabels this. But that's a different problem to tackle, I think.
All right, thank you for that, and I'll give the word back to the rector.
Thank you very much, Professor De Bruyne. Then now I will give the floor to the third member of this manuscript committee. This is Dr. Van den Borst, and he's a pulmonologist here at Radboud University Medical Center.
Thank you. Dear candidate, also from my part, I wish to congratulate you very much, and also your supervising team with this excellent work. So it was a privilege and a pleasure to be a member of the manuscript committee. And I also must say I have much respect for how you pulled this research through this difficult COVID pandemic, and you made even some good ideas from the COVID as well, so that was very nice to see. Today is the day that you publicly defend your thesis, and in that context I would like to share with you some ideas and questions on emphysema. Okay, and maybe to start off as a first question, just right away, you talk about end users quite a lot in your thesis in different aspects. With regard to the emphysema models that you created, who should we see as the end user there?
Dear opponent, I think in this case the end users would be the medical specialist and potentially a radiologist.
Okay. Okay, that's already satisfying because it's a team, right? In daily clinics.
Indeed.
So that is very important to state. And from there, you know, I can only underline from a clinical point of view that emphysema is a really major and growing clinical problem with patients experiencing high disease burden in their daily lives. And diagnosing it early is preferable to undertake preventive measures and even treat if there's overt COPD present. And I must say, in my daily clinical COPD practice, I receive quite some referrals with new patients where there was a signal of emphysema on their chest X-ray, which was made for any other reason by the GP or whatever. And I must say, those consultations are quite diverse and not always come to the COPD conclusion, and a lot of angles there. So I'm glad to see that you produce some work, that there's some progress there. I must say I'm a bit worried, but it could also be that I'm a little bit new to the AI field, I must say. That how do you deal with nuances in radiologist reports when you use the text in text mining towards creating labels maybe, or those nuances? So it could be a sign of cannot be excluded, phrases like that in the radiology, very relevant. How do you treat those in AI development?
Dear opponent, to be honest, I don't personally, I'm not a big supporter of using the radiology reports for generating labels, but this is common practice, and this is a way of generating labels in an easy way for a massive amount of chest X-rays. And that, indeed, as you say, it falls short when we are dealing with such fine details in the text report, and it's I think it's a whole field by itself, and Professor De Vries is also doing some work on that. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you in that question, but it is a major problem, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine that a radiologist writes, "There's no emphysema."
Indeed.
And you select for the word emphysema, just as simple as that,
Indeed.
basically. Yeah.
Indeed, and one of the problems that we have seen is subcutaneous emphysema, which is not COPD related.
Yeah, that surprised me. That came up, right? Okay, that's clear. So thank you. Then chapter 4, right? There's been some discussion already on the word explainable. Explainable emphysema was new to me. I didn't know that was something like explainable emphysema. It has something to do with the method. Can you explain that to me, maybe once more?
So there are 4 signs of emphysema that are considered in the work that we use. We use Stinan's work from 1965, and they froze the lungs of deceased patients, and they filled them with gas, and they performed some X-rays in them, and they collected a but 200, 300 samples of emphysema cases, and from those X-rays, they figured out some signs from frontal and lateral chest X-rays that indicate emphysema. And we are proposing to use these signs to detect emphysema rather than the black box approach.
Yeah, right. So the Soutine it's a landmark paper, right? Mm-hmm. And it's much been cited, and we know it very, very well. It has received some follow-up work also by Miniati and colleagues. So you refer to those researchers, and they validated that against the CT, objectified emphysema, and the severity of that. Yeah. About the inter-rater agreement that you describe in chapter 4, it's relatively low, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so too.
What were your thoughts on that?
I think even though the labels are very well defined, without further agreement between 2 radiologists, they are a bit vague. And I think with Miniati and their work, what they do is they train radiologists in those 4 signs. And what we did was we presented these 4 signs to 2 radiologists and asked them to interpret the signs however they will. So maybe we might have done a better work by putting these 2 radiologists together and then agreeing on how to interpret and how to label these signs.
Because they appear for relatively simple items to score, but apparently there's quite some discussion still, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see, okay. But what does that mean for the outcomes of your models? Do your models produce as good as two moderately agreeing radiologists, or am I then too pessimistic?
Well, we show in the, we compare our model with both radiologists separately, and we show that it's performing comparably well with those radiologists, but actually Miniati shows much higher inter-rater agreement, and that probably leads to much better models. However, as we have shown in chapter 3, these models are relatively robust to label noise. They are okay with some sort of label noise that is present in, that's coming from the annotation process. And I think having labels separately from both radiologists for training the model, I think it, to some extent, covers the problems that we may have introduced by making this mistake.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. If there's time for one short question.
I'm sorry.
Okay, we will continue
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah,
That's fine.
absolutely.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much. It's good. There are so many questions to ask, but I would like to give the floor now to the next opponent. She is an assistant professor in artificial intelligence department here at Radboud University, Dr. Gülçu Türk.
Dear opponent, dear Erdi, first I'd like to congratulate you on your thesis. And I will start my questions with a question for chapter 2. So at the end of your literature review, you mentioned that the direction of research has been largely determined by the available data and the labels, rather than what clinicians and radiologists need. So my question is, what are your suggestions to improve this? So if there are, and if we can, and shift the direction of research to problems that are more essential to tackle. So from a, from your perspective, not from like a big company perspective or a hospital perspective, like from researchers' perspective.
Dear opponent, this is an issue that requires just research. We need to talk with a lot of radiologists and understand their daily routine and extract the things that can improve their lives and that can improve their workflow. And yeah, it's mostly, I think, a commercial approach. Like research does not allow that for so much. However, I think research can also be a part of this process. This process can be done via research. People can research this process to extract what these requirements, what these needs are.
Okay, so field interviews with people who are doing the job and asking them what you need.
Interviewing, surveying, working with them, sitting in the dark room, and looking at them annotate some x-rays.
Yes, but okay, so you are a single researcher, you learned about the problems. Then how are you going to use these problems?
Well, that is, you are going to use probably deep learning to try to solve these problems. And right now, what we are doing is, oh, I have this data set. Let's create a model from it. And then let's throw it to the clinic and then see if it works. But I don't think it works. And I think using deep learning is a tool that can solve some problems rather than a tool that can produce some results. So I think that's the difference in how I want to see this.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So, yeah, but we need data, right?
Indeed, yeah. Indeed.
Yeah.
So we need data, indeed. Yes. And abundance of data is great, as you may say. And there are some methods, unsupervised methods, that can make use of this abundance of data. And like for example, contrastive learning example can come to mind. You can train really powerful models with these unsupervised, in this unsupervised setting, and then use only a small set of labeled data to perform the task that you want to perform.
Yeah, that was more the direction I wanted to take you. So I'm satisfied with that answer. Okay, my next question is about chapter 4. So there you introduce an explainable emphysema detection method, and as we have all asked questions about it, it was a rather impressive chapter. And your results seem that your method match or surpass the performance of a black box model, and this model was also developed by you. So I was wondering how the performance of your explainable model compared to the state-of-the-art other black box or otherwise methods in the literature.
I think that that would have been a great research to go ahead and compare our method with other methods. However, the label noise that is apparent in the state-of-the-art methods makes it difficult to evaluate the performance of those models. So those state-of-the-art models usually use noisy labels to train and evaluate a model. And as you may think, noisy labels are not great for evaluation. So comparing with the state-of-the-art results, in that sense, it wasn't that possible for us.
So you could implement one
I
yourself?
Well, I think my method can also be considered state-of-the-art.
Okay.
I do not have to use DanceNet 1024. So I think for the model that we use for the task, I think it's a quite powerful baseline. And this is actually the model that I use in most of my chapters.
So actually what you are saying is it is on par with...
I would say so, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so basically you don't need the comparison. Okay, so I think I have time for
A short question,
yes.
short answer.
Okay, so then it's about generalizability. Okay, so we have data from different hospitals, different machines, different populations of patients, and there is, of course, variability between these. I was wondering whether can we ever make sure that our models are generalizable in medicine clinics. Yeah.
I think the use of these models, the clinical implementation of these models, to my knowledge, that starts with evaluation and to see if it fits the given situation. And without that, I don't think these are plug and play things that we can just apply into a system and then expect it to work. I think it's always a process of close collaboration between many different departments.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you very much. Then I would give the floor to Professor Huisman. He's a professor in medical imaging, artificial intelligence at the NTNU University in Norway. Welcome here, Professor Huisman.
Dear candidate, first of all, let me congratulate you with a great thesis. And of course, I would like to include your promoter and co-promoter in that sense. I was very impressed with the literature review. It's a massive chapter. It was like page after page, and I think that was very interesting. So love to see that. Of course, I'm not just from the Norway University. You know me as a person also collaborating in other fields. I really like to compliment you also on your work that you did in the data team. That is a big team in the Radboud about collecting data. And we have heard it before. Data is very important, isn't it? So thank you for that. So when reading the thesis, of course, I was very impressed. But there's always certain locations that require a little bit of a question, of course. And one of them was in chapter 4. First of all, I'd like to read a little sentence here, because I kind of don't like what you did here. And that's about the, I don't read it. It's just about the equality, isn't it? You say, okay, my explainable AI is equal to a black box AI. And you do that by saying the p-value is above the significance level. That, statistically, is not nice, I can tell you. That you cannot conclude that if there's no difference, that they are equal, isn't it? But that said, I want to do a question on chapter 4. We have heard about explainability, of course, so not yet again a question about that. But in a way, you conclude that explainable is better than a black box. Huh? Let's make it black and white. And that sells, isn't it? You like commercial, you like that. Of course, a radiologist likes to have an explainable model over a black box model, isn't it? But then again, if I read a bit more carefully, your ground truth is a radiologist, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's the reports. So you made a system that answers more like a radiologist, isn't it? Because it's explainable, it uses the radiology features. I'm kind of not surprised, isn't it, that it then becomes a little better. But because I think if you have another ground truth, like the real outcome of a patient, like our colleague was already mentioning, would it still be true? Because the black box system, like Professor De Vries states, I'm an opponent of using black box systems. Mm-hmm. Let it learn itself. Maybe there are new features that the radiologist didn't look at it. Mm-hmm. In that light, what do you think?
Dear opponents, I think it's important to first understand what we are trying to achieve. What is the role of these models in clinical practice? And how we can help the lives of radiologists. Are we trying to replace them, or are we trying to help them? Here, my method is not we should use these 4 signs to detect emphysema. My method is we can use these kinds of understandable, more closer to day-to-day life of the radiologist features to help them support in decision making. And I think that has value. I don't think the specific 4 signs that I collected and the specific way I treated this problem, I don't think we should implement this, to be honest. I think we should, like this approach of defining the problem, I feel like what's important is that.
Yeah, but so I understand that you argue that the radiologists like to have this kind of system. And I think our next colleague will definitely get a question for you on that one. But let's not debate about it that much. The other question would be about chapter 6. Of course, Frodo, I know you a bit more, so the term Frodo, I could expect this from you. Although the last A in the Frodo was a little bit invented, I would say. So Frodo is all about like finding outliers, isn't it? And I think the method will definitely detect outliers, so compliment you on that one. But you might also think about patient populations. There are subpopulations. Maybe even in the emphysema is a big class, but there could be smaller classes, isn't it? Subpopulations. And in your method, I could argue that some of these small, less occurring patients might be regarded as an outlier in your method, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And then to bluntly reject them is not that great for those patients, isn't it? Could you comment on how that would work? Or how you could see maybe improvements, or how should we deal with that?
So I think it's a matter of question for the deep learning model. Can we say that for these small populations, we can make confident predictions using our models? Because our model has never seen these kinds of patients. Can we rely on this prediction? And I think the answer is open for research. But until then, I think it's safer to, if we are using a model to assist a radiologist, I think it's better to let the radiologist make the decision rather than get assistant on these cases.
Okay, thank you. I leave it up to with this question.
Thank you very much. Then we will conclude this defense by Dr. Schalenkamp. He is finally the radiologist who we talked a lot about already, and he's here at the Rabat University Medical Center.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Dear candidate, I also want to congratulate you with your great work and also include your supervising team in the great congratulations. I was indeed very pleased to see that you have been working on clinically applicable AI systems in radiology. But I was also a bit concerned when I look to my right. I'm the only radiologist here sitting at this table. And when I read your thesis, I understand a bit why. Because a lot of things are happening above the heads of simple radiologists like me. So I was happy that already a lot of questions were asked about explainability of AI systems. But I was also struck by your concluding words of your thesis, in which you say that you need to understand the needs of the radiologist to create a sensible AI system. What do you think are the needs of a radiologist for chest radiography reporting?
Dear opponents, I think this is a very big question. It's a really big question, and I think it really requires someone to sit down with the radiologist and work with them, or even be a radiologist to be able to really understand what these things are. I think in different parts of the world, these change. I think from hospital to hospital, this would change. So I don't think I can give one sentence that answers this question.
I understand that, of course, but could you maybe envision a little bit in the future, what say in about 5 or 10 years, would you expect to see the radiologist and AI work together?
Yes, I do.
Or separately?
I do see them working together.
And why do you think that that's the case? Because these systems are getting better and better. In chapter 5, I think you also showed if you integrate more parameters like laboratory markers or clinical symptoms, these systems get better. So now these AI systems perform much like for several tasks on the level of a radiologist. Why wouldn't that be better in 10 years than a radiologist?
I think, as I said many times, this is a matter of what we want to achieve using these models. I think communication is a very big part of life. And these models are not great at communicating things. They are just black box systems that we use. We can make use of technologies like ChatGPT to alleviate that problem. However, I think the human is always going to be there. Not always, but I think as far as I'm living, the human is going to be there. I'm not trying to, fight for it, but it's good. Like, human is going to be there, and these models should work with humans. That's how I'm seeing it working.
Well, that's good for my future. So I envision that I'm working together with this AI system. I'm using inputs of the system, but also have a boss that's telling me I need to speed up. Are these systems going to help me to speed up, or will they slow me down in the future?
I think that's a brilliant research question that we need to try to answer before putting these things into action.
Yes, I agree, but maybe you could tell a little bit more. So if a system gives me just one answer, it's for me, it's easy. Then I will get better. But in the chest X-ray, there are lots of questions to answer.
Yeah.
Do you maybe have an idea how to streamline this output of the AI system? Because that's something we're struggling with.
Yeah, might be that these models can highlight some things to look for, or some abnormalities that should be taken a look at. It might be a way to help the radiologist, or it might be in chapter 2 we see that people use these models for triaging chest X-rays to show the radiologist what is important first, like which X-rays they should see first. So I think there can be various ways that we can use these systems to improve the life of a radiologist, indeed.
Yes, I indeed think that as well. I think that some of the work could be done by AI, and some of the work will be done by radiologists. But do you think the easy work will be done by AI, or the easy work will be done by radiologists?
I think the easy work is the repetitive work, hopefully. And it would be great if an automated system can do this repetitive, easy work, so that there's more mental space for other things.
So my work is going to be harder in the future.
But more fun.
I agree. That will be more fun. Also, just one quick question to come back to the explainability of AI systems. Of course, that's what already is mentioned, that it's nice to have some kind of insight in what the AI system is doing. But isn't this just in a phase of the AI development that we want to understand what it's doing? But if it's eventually is getting better and better, do we really want to understand what it's doing? Can we really understand what it's doing? So is it helpful to focus on explainable AI or not?
I think in different levels of the life cycle of these models, there might be questions in why a model has made a certain decision. And I think then these explainable signals are relevant. Other than that, I don't think we should just use the explainable signals to answer questions unless asked. So that would be my way of implementing these explainable signals. It would be actually a black box result, and when asked, the model would provide the explanation.
Yeah, I think also in the future, if the models are getting better, we still should have some checkpoints. So in which we can reason what it's doing. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it might get lost in some kind of loop that we don't understand, but maybe it's not correct.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Another big issue, I think, in research with chest radiography is the ground truth of these labels. Also in your chapter 4, you often rely on radiologists. Mm-hmm. The big data sets rely on reports. Mm-hmm. Are there maybe other ideas to improve this ground truth? How should we make some kind of standard internationally? Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
In chapter 5, we use the RT-PCR as the gold standard, the swab test. Mm-hmm. And I think that's even though it's a very powerful gold standard, it's not perfect. We have seen that there were some cases where the label was wrong and we had to remove them from the data. And I think no matter what gold standard we find, there will be cases where things are not certain, because disease is there's always these borderline cases where it's difficult to make a decision about. So yeah, I don't think there's a way to create a perfect gold standard. I don't think that idea exists.
The perfect gold standard never exists. But in chest radiography, it is, if you ask 5 radiologists, you get 5 different answers.
Exactly.
So that's something that's kind of an issue. But currently, there are several research out there which only uses 1 radiologist as a reference, or maybe 2, or something else. Do you think that should be something that we should debate about, or make it some kind of better standard than just 1 radiologist?
Yeah, I think multiple radiologists is much better than a single one. And I think the introduction of different modalities like chest CT, it also improves the inter-rater agreement. So I think there are better approaches than just using 1 radiologist.
Thank you.
The defense is hereby concluded. I give the floor once again to the candidate.
Having defended my dissertation to the best of my ability, I would like to thank to the rector, my supervisor and co-supervisor, as well as all those who have honored this ceremony with their presence.
The doctoral examination committee now will retreat for its deliberations.
I forgot to breathe for a while.
On behalf of the Doctorate Board of Radboud University Nijmegen, we have decided to award you the degree of doctor. I invite Professor van Ginneken to discharge the task assigned to him.
With the power entrusted by law to the Doctorate Board, I hereby confirm to you, Erdi Çallı, born in Bursa, the title of doctor from Radboud University, Nijmegen, to which are attached all the associated legal and customary rights and duties with respect to academia and society. As proof thereof, I present you with this doctoral diploma signed by the rector and the doctoral thesis supervisor and co-supervisor.
Please be seated. Now Dr. Murphy, who was the daily supervisor of Dr. Çallı, will say some words.
Dear Erdi, dear Dr. Çallı, I am honoured to be the first to congratulate you on the amazing achievements that have been made official today here at your defence. It has been my great pleasure to be your co-promoter and daily supervisor through the 4 years of your PhD, and today is a fantastic culmination of all the hard work that you put in during that time. So congratulations, and now you can relax and enjoy your success and your new title. Or maybe you shouldn't just relax quite yet. So before we leave here, I want to take a small trip down memory lane to look back at the years that we worked together. We first met in 2018. Actually, Bram had already hired you to start in April, and he hired me to start in May with the idea that I would be your co-supervisor. And I reread my emails from that time, and I knew nothing except your name until the first time that we met. But I quickly knew once we met you that we would get on very well. I found out that you're a person of many passions, and although, like most PhD students, you had times of great passion for your research, you also had times where that passion waned somewhat. But you were never without a project or an idea or a plan or an ambition. You have a huge interest in all things technical, which was clear from your CV. You had senior experience in technical startups before you returned to academia. And during your master's, you had developed an app to help people with vision impairment to find items using the camera on their mobile phone. And almost as an aside, in another conversation, you mentioned to me that you had also developed an app to help children with their mathematical skills, and that I could download this in the App Store. And of course, I did so right away and immediately set my children to work counting hot dogs at the hot dogs stall. And I'm happy to give you partial credit for their mathematical skills today. Your technical skills were put to great use during your PhD, and you were always on top of keeping your code organized and optimized. And if I asked you for a new result or a statistic or a plot or a table, it would be produced at very short notice. You also took responsibility for the very serious task of booking our chest X-ray group restaurant outings, where it became customary for us to always eat sushi. And you took great care to track down every sushi restaurant in the greater Nijmegen area, so we never had to eat in the same place twice. When the pandemic struck in 2020 and the world was thrown into the unknown, you volunteered to work in the collection of COVID-19 imaging data from our hospital as a part of your role at the data team, which Henk-Jan also mentioned, but I think you took on that role to a much greater degree than you needed to. And you did this with great gusto and positivity, and you automated the entire process, and you contributed in no small way to several timely publications from our group on the COVID-19 subject. And you applied those same organisational skills when we decided to write our literature review on deep learning, together with HM, your co-PhD student. We began by organising our literature search in a Google spreadsheet named the CXR Review spreadsheet. But this was quickly deprecated and replaced in classic Erdi style by the most organised CXR Review spreadsheet. And you took responsibility and you did an excellent job of managing all the filters and scripts to download and manipulate the swathes of data within it. Throughout your PhD, we were colleagues and we were friends. In your thesis acknowledgements, you politely referred to the fact that all our conversations did not always result in agreement. And indeed, you can be stubborn, and maybe I can be even more stubborn. But there was never a moment where you lost your patience or you lost your calm, and we always resolved the issues without animosity, and the work got done and the papers got written. In 2021, in the last year of your PhD, with a classic determination and ambition, you decided to simultaneously embark on a Masters of Innovation and Entrepreneurship run by HEC Paris. I'm not sure if my jaw actually dropped when you told me about this plan, but I think I quickly recovered myself and settled for cautioning you about the amount of work that you were letting yourself in for. You took this on board with grace and you worked hard to keep up with the requirements of both the Masters and the PhD. When it came to completing your final thesis chapter, you set yourself a hard deadline of the last day of your contract to submit the paper for publication. I read back over a chat conversation that we had around that time, and let's just say that the stubborn natures I mentioned earlier were evident on both sides of the conversation. I was determined that you needed to complete the paper to a sufficient standard, and you were equally determined that the paper was going to be submitted by the time your contract ended. I give you full credit for the effort that you put in to meet both of those requirements. Your contract ended on March 31st last year, and on April 1st at 10 minutes to 5 in the evening, you submitted your paper to IEEE Transactions on Medical Imaging, where it was later accepted. In addition to finalising your PhD thesis and starting a new job, you also found time to graduate successfully from your master's course last year. Throughout the course of your PhD, your girlfriend, now your wife Gabby, was a steadfast feature in all conversations about personal life. You share many interests, including AI, where you've even worked on projects together, and Gabby has also recently graduated with a doctorate and the thesis focused on explainable deep learning. I was very happy to learn that you're now embarking on your greatest joint project yet, with a baby due to arrive in the next few months. And so the scene is set. You stand here today, Dr. Erdi Çallı, highly qualified in multiple disciplines and ready to embark on new adventures of career and of life. And I've no doubt of your capability to achieve anything that you set your mind to. I congratulate you once more and I wish you all the best in your future endeavours.
Dear Dr. Çallı, it gives me great pleasure on behalf of the board of the doctorate committee of the Radboud University to congratulate you. It was an amazing work and you've done a lot of other things I have understood already. And as you said yourself, humans will always be there, and now I understand better what you mean by that, but you have personally contributed to that. And so I would really like to congratulate also your wife and wish you a very happy child. And also, of course, your parents who are unfortunately not here, but I hope they will be very proud of you, and your brother and here your in-laws who are supporting you so much, your friends and colleagues. I wish you a very pleasant day. Now I would like to give the floor to Professor De Bruyne, who would like to congratulate you as well.
Yes, very well done. A great thesis, but I also really enjoyed the discussion we had today, not just us, but also the discussion you had with all the other committee members. So online meetings can be a little bit boring, but this one I managed to pay attention fully, and that was largely because of the interesting answers. So thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We have now come to the conclusion of this ceremony, and I ask you all to stand. We close this ceremony with the following words: Gratias tibi agimus, omnipotens Deus, pro omnibus beneficiis tuis, qui vivis et regnas per omnia saecula saeculorum.